There was a chair at the end of the conference table no one ever sat in. Elliot had placed it there himself 7 years ago on the day the building was renamed. He sat in one of the other chairs, the ones along the side, the ones no one photographed. She walked in wearing a white blazer he didn't recognize, flanked by a man in a charcoal suit and a smile that arrived about 4 seconds before anything else did. She looked at Elliot once. Just once. Who let the maintenance team into this room? She said to the woman beside her. Nobody corrected her. Elliot set his water glass down without a sound. He had known this moment was coming for 11 weeks and 4 days. He had prepared for it the way you prepare for weather, not to stop it, but to know exactly when to open your coat. "Mrs. Marsh," said the man in the charcoal suit, "should we have him escorted out before we begin?" She glanced back at Elliot with the expression she used when someone brought the wrong wine at a dinner party, polite. Slightly pained, already moving on. "Just ignore him," she said. "He's nobody." The irony is that she had signed the original funding agreement. The irony is that the signature was hers, and the money, every dollar of the $62 million that had built her company from a rented co-working desk into the building they were standing in, had come from a holding entity she had never once looked up. The entity's registered owner was the man she had just told her lawyer to ignore. So why was he smiling? If this is the kind of story that makes you feel something, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Let me go back, because none of this makes sense without it. Elliot Marsh had grown up in a house where the water heater went out every February, and nobody called the landlord because the landlord was 2 months behind on his own mortgage, and everyone understood the unspoken rule that you didn't push people when they were already stretched. His father had worked 31 years for a regional freight company and had come home every evening smelling like diesel and newspaper ink, and had never once complained about it within earshot of his son. What Elliot understood early, from watching that man navigate the world with something between dignity and resignation, was that money did not make people honest. It made them comfortable enough to stop pretending. His father had died when Elliot was 22, leaving behind a 2-bedroom house with a leaking roof, a savings account with $4,800 in it, and a brass pocket watch with a river engraved on its case. On the inside of the lid, scratched in his father's handwriting, the river knows. Elliot had never been entirely sure what that meant. He had carried the watch in his left breast pocket every day since the funeral, which was now 19 years ago. It was the only expensive-looking thing he owned that was not actually expensive, just old, and worn smooth in the places where the hand knew to find it. The first company had been logistics software. He had written the initial codebase in the bedroom of that same leaking house, using a laptop held together at the hinge with electrical tape. The company had been acquired 31 months later for $28 million. He had taken his share, paid off the house, had the roof fixed, and moved on to the next thing. By his early 30s, Elliot had built and quietly exited 4 companies. He had never given a keynote speech. He had never appeared in a profile piece. His name appeared in public filings in the same font as every other name, and nobody had ever thought to look twice. The reason for this was not false modesty. The reason was a woman named Catherine, whom he had been engaged to at 28, who had discovered the extent of his wealth through a mutual friend 3 weeks before their wedding date and had immediately begun restructuring the terms of everything: where they would live, who they would socialize with, what causes she would publicly champion, what her title at his company would be. She had not done this out of malice. She had done it automatically, the way water finds a new level. He had watched it happen over the course of 11 days and had understood, with a clarity that took years to stop hurting, that the person she was becoming had very little to do with him. He had ended the engagement on a Tuesday. He had not dated seriously for 4 years after that. And when he finally began dating again, he had made a decision that was equal parts protective instinct and the kind of stubbornness that only grief produces. No one would know. He would live as himself, ordinary, unfussy, content, and if someone chose him from that, the choice would mean something real. He had been living in a modest apartment in the same mid-sized city where he had grown up, driving a 7-year-old sedan, wearing the same 4 or 5 shirts in rotation, when he met Serena at a ceramics class he had enrolled in partly as a joke and partly because a therapist had told him to do one thing per week that had no instrumental value whatsoever. Serena was making a lopsided bowl and laughing at it. She had flour-colored clay on her left cheek and was completely unbothered by this. When he pointed it out, she looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has been caught doing something completely uncool and decided to own it fully, and she said, "Is this better or worse than having it on my chin? Because I think it was on my chin before." He had laughed in a way he had not laughed in years, from somewhere low and unguarded, the kind of laugh that surprises you on the way out. They dated for 14 months before he proposed. Those 14 months were the most straightforward period of his adult life. She worked as an interior stylist, not successfully yet, but with genuine appetite. She was sharp and opinionated about texture and light. She drove a hatchback with a cracked dashboard and was proud of it because she had paid for it herself. She had grown up middle class in a family that treated money as a slightly embarrassing subject, and she seemed to carry no particular longing for it. On their third date she had said, unprompted, "I think people who define themselves by what they have are sort of boring," and Elliot had felt something in his chest unknot itself so completely it almost hurt. He had not lied to her. He had simply not told her the full truth, and he had been honest about that in outline. He told her he had done well in technology and that he preferred to keep a low profile. She had accepted this without pressure, and he had taken that acceptance as a form of trust. He had been wrong about what it meant, but it took 4 more years to find that out. They married in a small ceremony with 31 people. Her mother, Diane Holloway, sat in the front row wearing an expression that suggested she was assessing the resale value of the venue. Diane was a woman who had spent 30 years performing the appearance of belonging to a social class slightly above the one she actually occupied, and she had the particular fluency of someone who has practiced this long enough to believe it. She had a membership at a club she could barely afford, a rotating wardrobe of 3 good coats, and a habit of mentioning other people's financial situations in a voice of mild concern that was neither mild nor concerned. She had assessed Elliot's apartment on her first visit, clocked the aged sedan in the parking lot, noted the absence of artwork on the walls, and had pulled Serena into the kitchen on a pretext of helping with the dishes to say, in the careful tone of someone delivering a prognosis, "He seems very sweet, sweetheart. I just want you to have a full life." Serena had come back to the living room looking faintly stung. She had said nothing to Elliot about the conversation. She had been still a person, at that point, who trusted her own judgment more than her mother's. That would shift. These things always shift gradually, and the gradient is almost never visible while you are standing on it. The first 2 years of marriage were good. Not perfect. Serena grew frustrated sometimes with the modesty of their life, with the apartment that was fine but not exceptional, with the vacations that were comfortable but never the places her growing roster of clients talked about. She had begun building a small interior design firm, and her clients were becoming wealthier, and their environments were becoming her reference point for what a life should look like. This was not a character flaw, it was an occupational hazard. But Diane was always there to water the dissatisfaction before it could dry out. Sunday dinners at Diane's house had a predictable structure. There would be news about someone Serena knew who had bought a house, or been promoted or married into something substantial. There would be a pause. Then Diane would look at the middle distance and say something like, "I just think about what you could have had with Preston," which was a man Serena had dated briefly at 24 who now ran a real estate firm and drove a black Range Rover. The name Preston appeared approximately once every 6 weeks over the course of 4 years of marriage. Elliot had met Preston once at a fundraiser and had found him deeply boring in the specific way of people who have never had to be interesting. He had never said this to Serena because it would have sounded defensive. He had simply let the name accumulate, like sediment. By the 3rd year, Serena had stopped making the lopsided bowl jokes. Not abruptly, gradually she had developed a new register, a measured, slightly formal voice she used when discussing their finances, their neighborhood, their plans. It was the voice of someone managing a situation rather than living inside it. Elliot noticed. He said nothing. He told himself this was a phase, which was something people told themselves about gradients they did not want to name. The firm was growing. Serena had taken on a commercial client, a hospitality group that was renovating 3 hotel lobbies, and the work was genuinely impressive. She had a real eye. She had always had a real eye. Elliot watched her build something with her hands and her instincts and found himself, despite everything, proud in a way that required no performance. And then, Camden Voss arrived. He came as a referral from the hospitality group, presented as a property developer with 3 projects in various stages of development who was looking for an interior design partner for what he called an elevated portfolio. He was 38, with the kind of physical ease that comes from being told since childhood that rooms will arrange themselves around you. He wore a watch that cost more than the sedan. On the first day he came to Serena's studio, Elliot heard about this from Serena that evening. In the new measured register, he had arrived in a car that was not technically available for purchase in this country, and had brought along a folder of projects that included a rendering of a ski chalet in a location Elliot recognized as one of the most expensive private developments in Europe. "He's very successful," Serena said, the way she might describe a geographical feature. "He said he's been looking for someone with real vision for 2 years. Elliot had set down his fork and looked at her. "And what did you say?" "I said I'd send him a portfolio." The watch in Elliot's pocket was warm from his body heat. He wrapped one hand around it, under the table, and said nothing. Camden Voss began appearing in the peripheral details of Elliot's life, at a rate that was too consistent to be coincidental. He was at the gallery opening Serena attended with a client group 6 weeks later. He was at the industry dinner she mentioned in passing. He sent a bottle of wine to the studio, Portuguese aged, the kind that required a specific glass. Serena mentioned this to Elliot with the neutral tone she had developed, but her cheeks had the specific color they got when she was trying not to show that something had pleased her, and Elliot, who had 19 years of practice reading things people were trying not to show, read this perfectly clearly. He said nothing. He stored it. The way his father had stored cold Februaries, not with bitterness, but with the knowledge that you would need to remember this when the time came. 4 weeks after the wine, Serena came home and announced that she had secured the full Camden Voss portfolio, all 3 projects, a contract worth somewhere in the range of $400,000 over 18 months. She was vibrating with something that looked like triumph and something else that Elliot didn't name yet. Diane called that evening. Serena took the call in the bedroom with the door closed, which was not something she had previously done. Elliot sat on the couch in the living room with the pocket watch in his palm, the river on its surface warm under his thumb, and thought about gradients, and timing, and what his father had meant about rivers. 3 weeks after the contract signing, Elliot received a message from a private number. The message contained a photograph of a document, a business loan application countersigned by Serena Marsh, submitted to a holding fund called Garnet Bridge Capital. He recognized the fund immediately. He had been the sole LP of Garnet Bridge Capital since its founding, 7 years ago. The fund had made exactly one investment in the last 18 months, a $62 million construction and design credit facility extended to an interior design and property development consortium that had been registered, Elliot now saw, under the names Camden Voss and Serena Marsh as joint directors. Serena had incorporated a company with Camden Voss. She had signed a joint directorship agreement. She had done this without mentioning it to Elliot, which was not merely a personal omission, it was a fraudulent one. Because the loan application listed her marital assets as partial collateral, assets that included accounts she did not solely control. She had not disclosed Elliot's existence to the fund. She had listed herself as a financially independent applicant. The loan had been approved 9 weeks ago. Elliot sat with the photograph for a long time. He was at his actual office, not the consulting space he described to Serena, but the real one. The one that occupied the 14th and 15th floors of a building 4 miles from their apartment. He sat at a desk with no visible papers and looked at the photograph on his phone screen. What he felt was not quite anger. It was something more like the sensation of a temperature dropping, the kind of cold that is not dramatic, that doesn't announce itself, that you notice only when you realize you stopped being warm a while ago. He thought about Catherine, and what she had done in those 11 days after discovering who he was. He thought about his father setting down a folder of unpaid bills on a kitchen table and not saying a word, just sorting through them in order of urgency. He thought about the pocket watch and the river. Then he called Paige Kessler. Paige had been his attorney and private financial counsel for 12 years. She was 46, direct in a way that dispensed with all social friction by simply not acknowledging that social friction was a category of problem she was equipped to address, and she had the specific quality invaluable in someone who managed large and complicated assets, of treating alarming information the same way she treated routine information as data requiring a response, nothing more. She had suspected something was wrong in Elliot's marriage for approximately 7 months. She had not said this because it was not her role to say it. When he told her what he had found, she was silent for exactly 4 seconds. "Send me the photograph," she said. "Send me everything else you have. And don't do anything at all until we've talked again." Elliot sent her the photograph. Then he opened a secure browser and logged into the Garnet Bridge Capital Administration portal, which he could access through a holding structure 3 layers deep, and which no one had ever thought to trace back to him. He pulled the full loan file. The application was 47 pages. He read all 47. Serena's signature appeared on pages 12, 28, and 41. Her stated net worth, filed without Elliot's knowledge or assets, was listed at $310,000. The document noted that she was sole applicant, unmarried. On page 34 in the section marked Project Leadership, the listed managing director of the consortium was Camden Voss. The listed creative director was Serena Marsh. The listed beneficial purpose of the loan was described as portfolio expansion and asset acquisition in the hospitality and residential design sector. Elliot closed the portal. He opened the drawer of his desk and set the pocket watch on the surface in front of him. He looked at the river engraved on the case. He remembered the morning he had taken it from the hospital bag after his father died, the weight of it heavier than he had expected, a heaviness that had nothing to do with the brass. He thought about the 847 people who worked in various capacities across the holding companies he had built over 2 decades. Designers, analysts, freight coordinators, software engineers, project managers, administrative staff in 4 cities. None of them knew his face well enough to pick him out of a lineup. All of them had mortgages or leases or school fees or dependent parents. All of them showed up. He thought about what a scorched earth response to this situation would do to the companies that sustained all of them, and he made a decision. Sitting alone at his clean desk with the brass watch in front of him, that what he was going to do would be surgical, not scorched. Surgical, he picked up the phone and called Paige Kessler again. Paige's first instruction was to do nothing visible, no confrontations, no changes to shared accounts, no unusual emotional behavior at home. He was to behave as if nothing had shifted, which was, Paige said, easier than it sounded because he had already been doing a version of this for months. Elliot had agreed and had then spent the next 11 days executing a performance of domestic normalcy that he would later describe to no one, because there was no one he wanted to describe it to. He drove Serena to a client dinner on a Tuesday. He bought grocery items from the list on the refrigerator on a Thursday. He attended a Sunday dinner at Diane's house, at which Diane mentioned Preston twice and the Voss portfolio twice, and managed to connect these 2 subjects in a way that implied they were related entries in a ledger of Serena's potential. Elliot had eaten the risotto and complimented it and driven them home in the sedan. Paige, meanwhile, had spent those 11 days pulling documents. She had requested the full corporate registration of the consortium, publicly available since it had been filed as an LLC, and had found that the entity predated the first meeting between Serena and Camden Voss by 14 months. This was important. Camden had not approached Serena's studio cold. The consortium had been registered 14 months before that introduction, which meant the referral from the hospitality group had been engineered. Paige had pulled the registration of the hospitality group and found that Camden Voss was listed as a 22% equity holder. He had sent his own referral. This was when Elliot had his first clear understanding of the full shape of what had been done to him. Camden had not chosen Serena because of her design talent, though the talent was genuine. He had chosen Serena because she was the wife of a man he had somehow identified, through channels Paige was still pulling on, as the LP behind Garnet Bridge Capital. Camden had gotten close to Serena as a means of accessing a $62 million credit facility through a fraudulent application. The personal element, the gallery appearances, the wine, the particular color in Serena's cheeks was, for Camden, operational. Whether Serena knew this, or had known it at the start, or had come to know it gradually and chosen not to stop? Elliot sat with this question for a long time. He sat with it the way you sit with a calculation you have already run 3 times and arrived at the same answer each time but keep running because you don't like the answer. Paige had a meeting with Camden's corporate attorney on the premise of a routine Garnet Bridge audit. She was entitled to this as legal counsel to the fund's LP, and had used that meeting to request 14 months of the consortium's transaction records, citing the audit protocol. The attorney had complied, apparently unworried, apparently certain that a routine audit by a fund's attorney was exactly what it presented as. The records came back on a Thursday. Paige called Elliot that afternoon. He's pulled $4. $1 million from the facility in 9 weeks, she said. The draws are coded as architectural fees and materials procurement. We have invoices. I had someone check 3 of the vendors named on the invoices. 2 of them are shell companies registered to a nominee director in Delaware. The 3rd is a legitimate supplier but was billed at 340% of market rate. Elliot was sitting in his car in the parking structure beneath his building when she said this. He had both hands on the wheel even though the car was not moving. "Send me the records," he said. "Already sent." "Elliot," there was a pause. "The signature on the draw requests is Serena's. Every single one." He did not respond immediately. The parking structure was very quiet. Somewhere below him a car's brakes made a sound like a question. "I know," he said finally. "I didn't think you would want me to soften that. You were right." He had wanted to confront her that night. He had walked into the apartment with the weight of it pressing behind his sternum and had watched Serena at the kitchen table reviewing a fabric sample with a magnifying glass. A tic she had developed in the first year of the firm, a habit of looking very closely at things, and he had felt something open up in him that was the opposite of anger. It was sadder than that. More structural. The kind of feeling that does not have a useful emotional category because what it really is, at bottom, is the death of a version of someone you were not ready to stop believing in. He had made dinner. He had sat across from her. He had listened to her talk about a hotel lobby specification, stone versus polished concrete, the cost differential, her preference, and he had been present and responsive in a way that required more of him than anything he had done in years. Then he had gone to bed and lain awake until 3 a.m. and decided to wait. He had 17 specific pieces of evidence. Paige was building 12 more, and the moment he confronted Serena or Camden or both, the window would close. He needed the window open for a little longer. Paige called 4 days later. She had found a second LLC, registered 6 weeks after the first, with Camden Voss and a nominee director who traced, through 2 intermediary entities, back to a series of related companies all controlled by the same beneficial owner, Camden Voss. This was the entity he was routing the inflated invoices through. He was, in effect, billing Garnet Bridge Capital through his own shell companies for work that was either not being done or being done at a tiny fraction of the invoiced cost. The fraud was not sophisticated. It was the kind of thing that survives because nobody looks, and nobody looks because the surface presentation is good, the charcoal suit, the unavailable car, the ski chalet rendering, the particular confidence of someone who has learned that rooms will arrange themselves around him if he walks in expecting it. Elliot spent the following morning in a conference room with Paige and the 2 forensic accountants she had engaged, reviewing a file that now occupied 63 pages. He did not tell Paige what he intended to do with the file. She knew already. She had worked for him long enough to know that he did not move until the folder was complete, and that when the folder was complete, he moved once. Deliberately and didn't miss. "There's an event," Paige said near the end of that morning. She slid a printout across the table. It was a press announcement, a gala, organized by the hospitality group, celebrating the relaunch of its first renovated property. The gala was in 19 days. The program listed the design team as Camden Voss and Serena Marsh, and noted that remarks would be given. The whole team will be there, press will be there, the fund's administrative board will be there, because the fund was the financing vehicle they'll be represented. Elliot looked at the printout. He thought about the conference table, the chair at the end that nobody sat in. "Book me a seat," he said. He did not tell Serena he was going. She had mentioned the gala twice, with the specific not mentioning quality of someone who was presenting an omission as an oversight. He had listened both times and said nothing. He knew she was not planning to tell him until the last possible moment, if at all. On the evening before the gala, he took the pocket watch out of his breast pocket and set it on the bedside table. He looked at it for a long moment, the river, the engraving, the worn places where his thumb went. He thought about what his father would have made of all of this. Not the money, not the betrayal, those were legible. He thought about the waiting. Whether it was the kind of waiting that was patience or the kind that was cowardice. He had come to believe, over the preceding weeks, that they were the same thing in different light. He put the watch back in his pocket. The Hargrove Hotel's ballroom had been transformed, and it was genuinely beautiful. Elliot could acknowledge that clearly, standing at the edge of the room with a glass of mineral water, watching the assembled guests move between the renovated furnishings. Serena had a true gift. The stone she had chosen for the bar surface caught the light in a way that made the room feel older and more considered than it was. The colors were warm without being heavy. He had always known this about her. It was one of the things that had made all of this harder. He had arrived 40 minutes before the scheduled remarks, which gave him time to identify the table placement, locate the two members of Garnet Bridge's administrative board who were present. He recognized them by name, not face, which was mutual, and find a position at the left edge of the room where he had an unobstructed sightline to the small stage near the back wall. Camden Voss arrived at 7:42. He had that same 4-second smile, the one that preceded him. He was in a dark suit that would have photographed well, and he moved through the room with the ease of someone who had already decided how this evening would go. Serena was at his right shoulder, wearing a dress Elliot had not seen before, in a shade of green that made her look like someone who had already arrived at the destination he was still commuting toward. She saw Elliot at 7:51. He watched her see him. The specific succession of adjustments, the slight stiffening, then the smoothing, then the performance of casual recognition. Took approximately 3 seconds. She said something to Camden without looking away from Elliot. Camden turned and looked, and his smile did not change, which was itself a kind of tell real surprise would have moved it. Serena crossed the room. She stopped 3 feet from Elliot. "I didn't know you were coming," she said. "Spur of the moment," he said. "This is," she began. "I know what this is," he said pleasantly. "Enjoy the evening. This is your work. It's beautiful." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he hadn't seen on her in 2 years, something startled and undefended. Then she turned and went back. The remarks began at 8:15. The hospitality group's CEO spoke briefly. Then Camden took the stage with the unhurried confidence of someone who had been performing for rooms his whole life. He talked about vision, about the courage to reimagine space, about partnership. He thanked Serena by name. He used the word "we" 14 times in 4 minutes, which Elliot counted. Then it was Serena's turn. She spoke about the stone, about the light. She was good at this, specific and warm without performing either quality. The room was attentive. From near the stage, Elliot heard Diane Holloway's voice. Of course she had come, saying to someone beside her in the carrying murmur she used when she wanted to be overheard, "She built all of this herself, you know. Completely self-made. Not everyone has the same advantages in life." A pause. "Her husband is very sweet." Elliot set his water glass on a passing tray. After the remarks, the room rearranged into its cocktail configuration. Camden was holding court near the bar. Paige was already present. Elliot had asked her to come as legal counsel to the fund's board representatives, which was her legitimate role, and which gave her standing to be in this room that had nothing to do with Elliot's personal situation. She caught his eye across the room and gave him the smallest possible nod. It was one of the Garnet Bridge board members, a man named Hollins, who ran the administrative arm of the fund, who provided the opening. Hollins was speaking to Camden's attorney near the bar, and Camden had drifted into that conversation, and the conversation had arrived at the audit. Camden's attorney was saying something about the timeline. Elliot stepped into the edge of that group, and Hollins looked up and startled slightly, visibly, in the way of someone encountering a person they had not expected to see anywhere near this building. "Mr. Marsh," Hollins said. The attorney frowned. Camden's smile did not waver. "Do you two know each other?" Camden said, with the easy curiosity of someone who had no reason to be concerned. "We've corresponded," Elliot said. "Paige, would you bring the file?" She was already there. Camden's attorney reached for the folder. Paige held it at shoulder height and said, in a voice calibrated to be heard by the 8 people in their immediate radius, "This is a forensic audit summary prepared by counsel for the beneficial owner of Garnet Bridge Capital. It documents 23 fraudulent draw requests totaling $1 million, routed through shell companies controlled by Mr. Voss against a credit facility obtained through a materially false loan application." Camden's smile moved then. It went somewhere else entirely. The loan application, Paige continued, listed the applicant as unmarried and financially independent. The applicant is not unmarried. Her marital assets were used as implied collateral without her husband's knowledge or consent. She paused. Her husband is the fund's sole limited partner. The room was not entirely silent. Rooms like this never go fully silent. There are always edges where people are still talking, unaware, but the specific pocket of people around this conversation went very still. Serena had turned from a conversation 6 feet away. Elliot did not look at her. He was watching Camden, who was looking at Elliot with the expression of someone who has been running a calculation for a long time and has just had the first number changed. "You've had 6 years to say something," Serena said. Her voice was even. "Why now?" Elliot didn't answer right away. He set the folder on the low table between them and let her open it herself. "Because I stopped waiting for you to ask," he said. She looked at the first page. She looked at the second. Her face did the thing faces do when the ground rearranges, not dramatic, just the quiet revision of a previous certainty. She turned to Camden, and the question she did not ask out loud was visible in every line of her posture. Camden said, "Serena, I can explain. The signatures are yours," she said. Not loudly, just with the specific flatness of a statement that does not need to be performed. On the draw requests, every one of them. Hollins had his phone in his hand. Camden's attorney had taken 3 steps back, which was a physical movement that amounted to a professional declaration. The Hargrove Hotel's ballroom continued to function around the edges of all of this, because high-end rooms are engineered to maintain their atmosphere even when the people inside them have stopped. Diane Holloway materialized at the outer edge of the group. She looked at Elliot, at the folder, at Camden, at Serena, and then she said, in the concerned tone, "What exactly is happening?" Serena looked at her mother for a long moment. Then she looked at Elliot. "Who are you?" she said. And the question was not hostile. It was the first honest question she had asked him in 2 years. He pulled the pocket watch from his breast pocket and set it on the table beside the folder. The brass caught the warm light Serena had designed. "Someone who should have answered that sooner," he said. The legal proceedings moved at the speed that forensic financial cases always move, which is to say, steadily, without drama, with the particular momentum of documented evidence moving through established channels. Camden Voss's attorney formally withdrew from representation within 72 hours of the gala. Camden had retained new counsel by the end of the following week, but the posture of that counsel's communications made clear they understood the situation. 23 documented fraud counts, 2 shell companies with direct beneficial ownership traced through forensic accounting, and a credit facility obtained through a materially false application. The evidentiary package Paige had built over those weeks was the kind that did not require courtroom theatrics to be persuasive. It was the kind that required only that someone competent read it carefully. Camden's new attorney opened negotiations with a settlement offer that amounted to a return of $2 million and a full dissolution of the consortium entity. Elliot's position through Paige was $1 million returned in full, dissolution of both the consortium and the 2 shell entities, a signed confession of the loan fraud admissible in any subsequent civil proceeding, and a permanent prohibition on Camden Voss accessing any financial product managed or co-managed by any entity in which Elliot held a beneficial interest. Camden's counsel called this aggressive. Paige said it was arithmetic. The negotiations lasted 16 days. Camden signed on the 17th. What Elliot had not done during those 16 days, and what many people in his position would have found irresistible, was contact any of the business or press relationships Camden had cultivated over the preceding years to accelerate his professional unraveling. Camden's reputation in the property development community would suffer, The fraudulent application was a matter of legal record, discoverable by any future lender or partner, but Elliot made no phone calls, sent no emails, and gave no interviews. He had thought about this carefully. Camden's network was full of people who were professionally adjacent to the hospitality group, which was in turn professionally adjacent to vendor relationships that supported 847 employees across the fund's portfolio of invested companies. A scorched approach would have moved through those relationships the way smoke moves through a connected structure, and the people who would have felt it first and most were the ones who had simply shown up and done their jobs. He had told Paige this on the day he set the terms. She had made a note and said nothing, which was her way of saying that she agreed. Serena's situation was more complicated, because the complications were not primarily legal. Her signatures on the draw requests were genuine, she had signed them. Whether she had understood the full nature of what she was signing, or had signed at Camden's direction without full comprehension of the shell structure, or had understood precisely and proceeded. The forensic record could not determine this, because the record was the signatures themselves and the intent behind them lived only in her account of her own thinking. Her account, given to Paige's associate over 2 sessions, was that Camden had told her the draw structures were standard procurement protocol, that the vendors were legitimate, that the nominee director arrangement was a tax efficiency measure. Whether this was true, whether she had been Camden's instrument or Camden's partner, Elliot had concluded he was not going to spend the rest of his life trying to determine. He filed for divorce on a Thursday morning, from his office, in the building where the chair at the end of the conference table remained unoccupied. The filing was standard, his terms were straightforward, he was not seeking recovery of any marital assets she had independently developed, which included the equity she had built in her studio prior to the consortium agreement. She could keep the client relationships, the business infrastructure, the brand. He was asking for nothing from her professionally. He was asking for the marriage to end because it had already ended, and the paperwork was a formality. She had her attorney call Paige the following morning. Her attorney conveyed that she wanted to speak to Elliot directly. He had agreed to one conversation. They had met in a conference room, neutral, a hotel, not their apartment, not his office. And Serena had come in wearing the plain clothes she wore when she worked, the ones she had been wearing when he first saw her, and she had sat down across from him and said, "I knew something was wrong. About Camden. I knew it, and I didn't stop." He had looked at her for a long time. "I know," he said. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" she said. "In the beginning. When you had the chance." He had thought about this every day for 11 weeks and 4 days and had arrived at an answer that was not satisfying but was accurate. "I thought I was protecting myself," he said. "But I think what I was actually doing was setting a test I never told you about. And that wasn't fair." She had been quiet for a moment. "I think I failed it anyway," she said. "Yeah," he said, "I think we both did." They had not said much after that. The divorce terms were agreed within 3 weeks, which, Paige noted, was unusually efficient. Paige attributed this to both parties being tired of the situation in the specific way that people become tired when the thing they are carrying is no longer attached to any hope of a different outcome. The studio remained Serena's. She hired a forensic bookkeeper to review every transaction from the period of the consortium agreement, at her own initiative, without being asked. Elliot was told this by Paige and had sat with the information for a while and concluded that it was the most honest thing Serena had done in the preceding 2 years. Diane Holloway called Elliot once. He had declined the call. He had thought about what he might say if he answered, and had decided that whatever he might say would not be useful to either of them. She had spent 4 years inserting a name, Preston, into her daughter's life like a slow splinter, and the specific harm of that habit was the kind that was too diffuse and too incremental to assign clearly, and too familiar to be worth Elliot's time to catalog. He had let the call go to voicemail and had not listened to the voicemail and had moved on. Camden Voss, having signed the settlement agreement, completed the return of funds, and dissolved the entities, had attempted to re-enter the property development market in a neighboring city under a restructured business arrangement. Paige monitored this through the routine legal channels and reported it without alarm. The prohibited access provision applied only to Elliot's managed entities, which were sufficient for Elliot's purposes. What Camden chose to do with the rest of the world was between Camden and the rest of the world, and the rest of the world had access to public legal records. The 847 people who worked across the portfolio had not been affected by any of this. The companies had continued to operate. The freight coordinators and software engineers and design analysts had received their payroll on schedule throughout the preceding 4 months. This was not accidental. It was the product of a decision Elliot had made in a parking structure with both hands on a steering wheel, and he did not feel heroic about it. It seemed to him like the minimum required behavior of a person in his position. His father had sorted bills in order of urgency not because he expected recognition for it, but because there was a sequence in which things needed to be handled. And you handled them in that sequence, and you did not make yourself the story. The chair at the end of the conference table was still there. Elliot sat in it once, on the afternoon the settlement was finalized, sat in it alone in the empty room just to see what it felt like. It felt like a chair. He moved back to his usual seat. There is a version of a story like this one that wants to be about money, about the revelation of wealth as a kind of justice, the exposure of the gap between what people assumed and what was true as the mechanism by which the scales balance. Elliot had understood from the beginning that he did not want to tell that version. The money had never been the point. The money was a circumstance. The point was something smaller and harder to name. He had kept his father's pocket watch in his left breast pocket every day for 19 years. He kept it there still. On the afternoon he sat in a park 3 blocks from his office with a paper coffee cup and no particular agenda, which was something he had not allowed himself in years, an afternoon with no particular agenda. The watch was warm from his body. He turned it over in his hand the way you turn something over when you are not looking at it but thinking through it. The river knows. He had asked his father once what it meant, in the last year of his father's life, when the asking felt more urgent than it had before. His father had been quiet for a moment. He was a man who treated questions as things that deserved actual consideration, and then had said, "A river doesn't need to be told it's moving. It doesn't need someone to confirm which direction. It just moves." He had paused. I think I put it on there so I'd remember that. Elliot had been 21 then and had not entirely understood it. He understood it better now. He had spent 6 years building a wall of concealment that he had told himself was protection, and it had protected him from nothing, and had instead created a space in which a fraud could be engineered, and a person he had loved could make choices she might have made differently in clearer light. He was not taking responsibility for her choices. He was taking responsibility for his own, which was a different and more manageable thing. He thought about the woman who had looked at a lopsided bowl and laughed at it without embarrassment. He thought about the morning she had found the clay on her cheek and decided to own it. He thought about the version of her that had existed before Diane's voice and Camden's charcoal suit, and the accumulating weight of comparison had done their slow work. He did not know if that version was still available to her. He hoped it was. He did not plan to be the person who found out. What he planned was simpler. He planned to finish the coffee. He planned to walk back to the building and sit at his desk and do the work that needed doing, the freight logistics review, the software company's board memo, the 6-month projection for a design firm that one of his analysts had flagged as worth a second look. He planned to keep the watch in his pocket and not make it mean more than it meant. He planned, very specifically, to not do to his own future the thing he had done before. Construct a test for the next person who got close. A test they didn't know they were taking, a test he had never been brave enough to waive. You don't have to have built anything to understand what this story is really about. You just have to have been the person who showed up as something smaller than you were because you were afraid of what the truth would cost you, and then discovered that the concealment cost more. The accounting on that is always the same. The concealment always costs more. If this story stayed with you, you're in the right place. We tell stories like this every week, stories about what people carry, what they hide, and what happens when the folders finally open. Hit subscribe and share this one with someone who needed to hear it. And if you've ever had to choose between staying quiet and speaking up, you already know which choice leaves you something to carry home. The river knows.